October the 28th, 1988, Ontario, Canada. Solange Ballard complains of a stomach ache and then is subjected to one of the most sadistic surgeries known to man. The man who leads their cult strips her naked, ties her to a table, punches her in the stomach a few times, then forcefully inserts an enema containing molasses and olive oil. He then cuts her open and rips out a chunk of her intestines. Then he commands a female member of the cult to sew back the wound. Afterwards, a tube is inserted in her throat as the female members blow air into the tube. Ballard would die the next morning. The leader then drills a small hole into her head, claiming he has powers to bring her back to life. He then ejaculates into the wound and tells several of the male members of the cult to do the same. What kind of a monster would do such a thing? Let's meet Roch Thériault. He is the leader of the cult known as the Ant Hill Kids. He was born in Segway, Quebec, Canada in 1947, and as a child, he was thought to be highly intelligent. However, he would drop out of school in the 7th grade. He would teach himself the Old Testament and leave Catholicism for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He would live strictly by the Adventist rules: no tobacco, no unhealthy foods, abstaining from drugs and alcohol. He would then begin to organize seminars for the church and begin declaring himself a prophet, changing his name from Roch to Moses. He would then convince a sect of his Adventist followers to break away from the main church and follow his teachings. The cult would get the nickname the Ant Hill Kids due to their hard work. The aesthetic of the cult showed hard-working people who were without sin or prejudice. Yet the Adventists would eventually kick them out of their religion. Thériault would then forbid contact with any member of the cult and their families. He would also begin drinking, which led to chronic alcoholism. In his drinking binges, rules for followers would become more strict and weirder. First, he banned the eating of meat and consumption of tobacco. There was even at one point where Thériault would forbid his followers to speak to each other without his presence. They were bakers by trade, and that's how they made their money. They would sell their baked goods. However, as some of you in sales know how hard it is when your manager jumps on you when you don't meet your quota, Thériault took things to an entirely different level. If any of the cult failed to meet their sales quotas, he would then beat them with belts and hammers. That was just the beginning of it. It would then escalate to the point where members would be hung, and their body hairs would be plucked from their skin one by one. And if that wasn't enough, he would go as far as defecating on them. But when he was angry, well, that's when the fireworks would really go off. Thériault fancied himself a surgeon. He would force members of the cult down onto a table, have other cult members hold them down, and he would use whatever was at hand. This included kitchen utensils, blowtorches, or, even the tried and true pliers. As the seminars decreased, Thériault began to predict the end of the world. He claimed that in February 1979, the world would end. But there was a place in St. Joseph, Quebec, at a place called the Eternal Mountain, he thought would be saved. So that's where he took his cult to ride out the end of the world and begin anew. Well, 1979 came and went, and there was no apocalypse. How did he explain everyone seeing 1980? Well, according to Thériault, God's time and human time were not parallel. So, he made a miscalculation. But as per usual, cult leaders are always after the two W's: your wallet and your woman. Since he was in control of everybody's wallets already, and the fact that he was worshipped as the number one prophet of God, he also had the women. Within the cult, he would end up fathering up to 26 children. And the children weren't spared either. Theriot would sexually and physically abuse the children. In one instance, a child that was acting up was nailed to a tree and pelted with stones. Another incident saw Theriot force an infant to stay outside in the Quebec winter. The child would die due to exposure. The child died after Dr. Theriot performed surgery on him. In a fit of rage, he would castrate the member that originally injured the child. Fast forward to the end of the decade. It's now 1989. 1 year earlier, Gabrielle Lavallee finally had enough. She was the one that was forced to bury Solange Ballard. And during her time in the Anthill Kids, Lavallee endured such tortures as having a blowtorch used on her genitals. She also had 8 teeth pulled out of her mouth because she said she had a toothache. She also had a hypodermic needle break off into her spine. Now, she did try to escape, but once she came back, she endured more torture than prisoners of war. Her punishment was to have her arm cut off with a hunting knife. And after having her breast cut off and her head smashed in the face with an axe, she finally had enough, escaped, and went to the police. Theriot would only be initially charged and convicted of assaulting Lavallee. He would be sentenced to 12 years in prison. Following the conviction, the majority of the cult left. Some did stay. However, Lavallee's report gave the police enough evidence to begin the investigation of the rest of the cult, leading to the surviving children being taken by Child Protective Services. The report also led to second-degree murder charges in the case of Solange Ballard. Theriot would be convicted and sentenced to prison for the rest of his life. Most of the cult would go away. However, some followers remained, and while in prison, Theriot would go on to father 4 more children. However, in 2011, Theriot finally met his fate. He had an altercation with his cellmate, Matthew Gerard MacDonald. The altercation would lead to MacDonald stabbing Theriot in the neck with a shiv. Then MacDonald walked up to the guardhouse and said, quote, "That piece of shit is down on the range. Here's the knife. I've sliced him up." Theriot never died as he envisioned, a prophet from God that was going to lead a cult all the way through the end of the world. Instead, we only remember the Anthill Kids as a Manson-like cult with a leader that was more sadistic than Stalin or Pol Pot.